Disco is so much more than a musical genre. It's embedded in all our lives, from boogieing with our parents as kids to fun nights out as a student, all the way into our later years when we increasingly realise that disco is the town square for most social engagements, a place where, despite our tribal allegiances, we gather and dance with every generation around us. This is Start Here, the podcast from the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music, with me, Alexis Ffrench. This is where we get to deep dive and get under the skin of a genre. I'm a classical pianist, composer and producer, and I can talk endlessly about those worlds. But what about the world of punk, gospel, grunge? I'm excited to get into all of these genres on this series of Start Here. In this episode, it's time to brush off the dust from your platform shoes, step onto the dance floor and pull your best Travolta pose as we dive into the world of disco. Our guide today is a musician and historian of this incredible genre, DJ and host, Ana Matronic. Ana Matronic, so good to be in your company. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Alexis?
Yeah, I'm super excited to speak to you today. Big fan of your work.
Thank you.
So looking forward to this. And as you know, we kick off all of our episodes with this thing we call the elevator pitch. We didn't invent it, but it's a nice fit for the start of the show. And it's where you give your best pitch, and it can be as extensive or as pithy as you like, where you just pitch why people should be listening to disco music.
I have a pithy pitch.
Nice.
I have a pithy pitch. I think people should listen to disco simply because their body needs music as much as their ears and their brain. And disco is the soundtrack to liberation.
That is so cool. That is one of the best yet. And I don't say that to everybody, Anna, but I love that. The soundtrack to liberation, and also just the fact it's a genre so woven into the fabric of our bodies, our physical selves,
yes.
As well as our spiritual selves as well. And I think that's so important in music. It's fundamental, in fact. And there's so many layers to disco. I've been doing, not only reading about your background, and it's so many strands to your professional output and creative life as well, which we'll get into. But sort of picking away the layers of disco, if I could put it like that, it can be so easily reduced and patronized as a genre of music, as superficial in a way, fanciful, but it's not. Can you tell us about the weight of disco? In fact, you know, how it provides, it's more than just sparkly dresses or tinchley shoes on the dance floor. Tell us about its beginnings and what it means to you.
Well, it depends on where you want to start. If you want to talk about disco as a music, that starts with rhythm and blues in the United States in the 1960s, really, when that sound was quite codified and distributed first amongst black labels like Motown or Stax. But disco as a word goes back to before World War II and goes back to World War II and to basements in Nazi-occupied France, where kids were outlawed against listening to American jazz because that represented the nexus of Black and Jewish cultures in the United States. And those records were outlawed, so they got together and they had disco dance parties in their basements. And discotheque originally means record collection. And then it became a place where you go, and then it became a music. So that's one of the reasons why disco as a concept is so multi-layered and really goes back very, very far. We're actually closer to the 100th anniversary of the birth of disco than we are the birth of disco. We're closer to that concept, and the 100th anniversary. It's a much older concept that people even really get into.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when we talk about disco as a music, it is deeply entrenched in rhythm and blues in the United States and Black culture in the United States. And then it becomes a hybrid music. And that is what is so beautiful to me ultimately about disco. It is a world music, and it is the reminder to the Western world that dance is not just something to, as dance is not just a prelude to sex, because, and it also is. But disco is the door opening to dancing as an ecstatic experience and as a religious experience. And that's the closest we get to in Western culture to that, to touching that. It's the non-West. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because it strikes me just listening to you talk and also just reading about disco. So much of it can be dismissed as a sort of hedonistic kind of countercultural pursuit. But it's so much more than that. And as you say, it was a thing even before the music itself.
Yes.
Is it true to say, therefore, given its beginnings and its genesis and how it came about, that it was synonymous with the idea of somehow radical liberalism or resistance in any way?
I do think that is part and parcel with disco. I think there is always amongst subcultures a recognition of the other and a bringing in of the other. And so, disco was championed. Disco as a music, when we talk about the 1970s, was championed by mostly Italian, Latino, and Black folks playing an eclectic mix of music for exclusively gay crowds or mixed crowds that were not being serviced by larger clubs.
Yeah.
And couldn't legally dance together without being subject to police raids or those sorts of things. So there's always this sort of underground resistance and pushback. My friend Johnny Dynell always says, never forget that disco was started by gay hippies. And he's right. When you trace the 70s culture of disco, I would say all roads lead to Mancuso. So David Mancuso was the person that is credited with throwing the first disco parties at the Loft, which was his home in New York City, starting in 1970, Valentine's Day, 1970.
Amazing stuff. So which records or clubs or artists do you see as the true sort of starting gun for the disco era? And what made them different from earlier forms of dance music, Anna?
Disco starts... I really think it starts with artists like Isaac Hayes and Curtis Mayfield, and those soul artists that really brought in a very, very high level of production, and producers like Gamble and Huff in Philly. And Philadelphia and the Philadelphia soul sound is instrumental to the creation of disco. And so those Philadelphia artists, particularly Barry White, are the sort of nexus where we get disco taking off, which is very, very soulful music paired with very, very dramatic, indulgent, sweeping cinematic orchestration.
Yeah, that's super interesting to me, because that's what I think of when I think of those artists. The expansiveness also of those orchestrations, and also the lyricism of
Absolutely.
that. And it's almost as if there's almost a dissonance in those production values, because the music in its beginnings and how it came to be and its resurgence, and then you almost have these sort of pseudo-classical textures on top, if you like. And I've often listened to that music. I've often listened to that music and pondered what's really been said by all of these ingredients, by these kind of Mantovani-style strings, or even Rachmaninoff-style orchestrations.
Yeah.
And who led that production, those high production values in disco? You said it started in Philly, and that's when it started to come into force. But who were the producers around at that time? who were really, I guess, pivotal in that sort of style?
It would be Gamble and Huff, because they're the people who really put the orchestra or the orchestral sounds. They're the ones who put together what would become MFSB and the Sal Soul Orchestra and those really big disco orchestras, who were essentially kind of the same session musicians who just changed their names and rolled around different productions in between them and New York City. So I would really dig into Gamble and Huff and their discography. And what's interesting about disco is also, this is the era where we get the remix, and we get people like Tom Moulton coming in and becoming names, Walter Gibbons, and those people who extended songs into 12 inches and turned songs that were really, really cute radio singles into dance songs. Al Green songs became extended 5-minute songs because they were hits in the disco. And and I also want to mention cinema and blaxploitation, because that was a huge touchstone, I believe, for the beginning and the genesis of the disco sound. And blaxploitation film soundtracks, like the Shaft soundtrack, which you can absolutely is 100% disco.
Yeah.
Those and Sweet Badass Song, and what's the Brother's Gonna Work It Out. Those incredible soundtracks added that cinematic flair that took off on the dance floor, and the DJs who were championing these records wanted songs with drama and space and all kinds of movements for their dancers on the dance floor.
Yeah, interesting. And something that we'll get into is when that niche subculture blew into this phenomenon as we know it to be. But I'm keen to just articulate, if we can, or frame what disco is in musical terms. We don't need to get into terminology, but what makes disco disco? Are there chords that we often hear in terms of chord progressions? Instrumentation we've already established. We can often hear these orchestrated cinematic motifs in violins, etc. Is it a simplistic form in terms of music, or is it known for its complexity? How would you describe it, Ana?
I describe disco as a hybrid dance form of 4-on-the-floor rhythm and blues.
4-on-the-floor rhythm and blues, right?
And that's how DJs, when they first started codifying this thing that became disco, that's how they were referred to it, as danceable R&B, and that's what it is. It's it contains blues and jazz progressions, chord progressions. It's often minor key, but not exclusively. It's often fast, but not exclusively. It can run the gamut from very slow to very, very fast. And one thing that I think differentiates disco from a lot of the music at that time was that, and I get pushback for saying this, but disco isn't cool. Disco is warm, and sometimes it's hot.
I like it.
You can go, the bluest, you can go the bluest of the blue, and, you get incredible disco covers of songs like I Who Have Nothing, which is my favorite disco cover of all time, Sylvester.
Yeah.
And that's a torch song.
Right.
Classical too. The most amazing, mind-blowing track I can play often is Magic Bird of Fire, which is the disco version of Stravinsky, the Firebird Suite.
You are joking.
Oh no, it's on the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack.
It's not
fabulous.
Really. That is incredible.
Fabulous. It's
my
fabulous.
Goodness.
And there's so many. There's and a lot of there's Switched on Bach, which is Wendy Carlos, of course.
Yeah, iconic,
a seminal electronic record, and I think she really kind of kicked off that sort of electronic covers of orchestral songs, and there's a lot of them.
That's incredible.
That's Hunchback of Notre Dame. There's Romeo and Juliet. There's a lot.
Prokofiev, Romeo and Juliet in disco style? Or
yes.
No.
Yes.
You are blowing my mind, Anna, at the moment. This is crazy. I didn't know this. We touched on Bee Gees. And to most people, if you say disco, I think a lot of people would come back with Saturday Night Fever.
Yes.
What did that do for disco?
Well, it mainstreamed it. Up to that time, disco had been a presence coming from the underground and having a presence with hits on the radio.
Yeah.
And the big disco parody song was Disco Duck, which came out in 1976. So that was kind of on the early side of things. Saturday Night Fever came out at the end of 1977. So disco was huge. I Feel Love was already out.
Yeah.
But what it did was it kicked it up to the suburbs. And so the kids, like little 5-year-old kids are now in the suit
doing
and
this. Yeah.
And it definitely whitened and diluted disco into something more a little bit more cheesy and commercial. So this is when we get the Village People.
That's interesting. So there's a distillation of so it was seen through a slightly different prism at that point. And how did that affect the music? How did that affect the true disco music?
I don't think I need to tell you what happens when the record company smells a trend and comes in and completely rinses it. And that's what happened. And there was also especially in the United States, there was a snootiness that got injected into disco. So when you get places like Regine's or Studio 54 with their very tight door policy, where you get places with door policies where men can't come in if they're not wearing a tie or a jacket.
Yeah.
When you get minimums, when you get bottle service only, and you inject that VIP douchebaggery into the scene, then it dies, and then it becomes anti-working class, which disco always was, and also disco injected a level of upward mobility and projected upward mobility for Black Americans in a way that was not part of the mainstream before. So you get bands like Chic, that were always pressed, always looking amazing. And for a lot of people in the United States, seeing rich Black people didn't sit right with them. I don't need to tell you why. And you get a pushback and a reaction against that. And so there was a big that's when the disco sucks movement kind of starts, and the disco demolitions start. And they're wrapped up in a lot of class and race politics. So there's a lot in there. And then there's also the sort of continual devaluation of things that gays and girls like by white male record critics, music critics. And that happened a lot with disco, where people like Legs McNeil, who is the, premier punk journalist, says, disco is the unholy alliance of blacks and gays. And things like that.
My goodness me.
You get the sort of cognoscenti coming down on it because it's not intellectual enough. And so part of my mission is to say disco is intellectual because your body has a consciousness as well. And that's what disco plays to, is your body consciousness.
Yeah. It's interesting that you talk about the... It was a term, black ivy, as it was when black people were dressing, in very sort of ornate garments, and there was a lot of social mobility, and frankly, we're rising up in terms of the echelons of society. Was that then seen as being synonymous with disco at one point? And was that the thing that caused the uprising against disco? Because I know that there was, in about 1979 or something, there was some... Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
I'm not sure that you can really pinpoint one thing and say that was it, but there have been a lot of people who have pointed to a lot of different things about disco as being difficult for a lot of folks in the U.S. to swallow. But this is a constant pushback with any sort of art form in the United States that gets really popular, that comes from people of color. And, we've been going through this right now with Bad Bunny.
Indeed.
It's the same thing.
Indeed.
There is for every marginalized community that comes up and says, hey, look what we can do, and isn't this wonderful, and isn't this joyful? You have the conservative pushback that says this is going to corrupt our daughters and, destroy the fabric of our society and all of that stuff. And, back when I was a teenager, it was gangster rap.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because there is this notion of music, or certain types of music, as being based on, or not the subjugation of human instincts, but as sort of a complete betrayal of our higher selves. And you mentioned Bad Bunny there, and I note that in the critiques of his performance, they were talking about over-sexualization and music and antics and gestures, how this is improper, etc.
Meanwhile, let's bring on the cheerleaders.
And you're quite right. We've heard this throughout history with all sorts of music, particularly when it reaches that level of popularity and it's brought into mainstream culture. So the arguments back then against disco were exactly that, were they? Sexualization and
hedonism, and obviously, the very, very gay nature, queer nature of disco was pressing at the moral fabric. The feminization of men was a really big thing because, the sort of butch rock and roll types, country types, pushing back against the pretty boy John Travolta types.
Is it as closely aligned with politics today as it was then? Tell us a little bit about its trajectory post-1979, post it up to, not completely up to the present day, but talk us through its trajectory in terms of political landscapes.
I think all forms of getting together to dance with your community are political if you are from a marginalized community. So dancing and leisure and pleasure are all wrapped up essentially with privilege, and who is allowed to have free time, who can afford to have free time, who can go out, who has the means to have a sound system, get a DJ, have a space, put it on. So all of these things are wrapped up in, especially in the United States, with a certain amount of privilege. And the ways and the most vital movements of people and innovative movements of people are the ones that are born out of having the least, and that innovation comes out of cobbling together what you have in order to make something great. Once a group of people start getting together and make something that is attractive to outsiders, then the money will start coming in, then the people will start coming in, and then those spaces will be declared nuisances. Then those spaces will be taken over by the bigger spaces that then capitalize on them and commodify them.
Mm. So how did you first get into disco, Ana?
My love of disco kind of came as a reaction, really. I have to preface this by saying that the house that I grew up in was very much a blues and R&B house. My mother is from New Orleans. She grew up listening to the race stations on her transistor radio. And she introduced me to music, and our relationship was based around loving music a lot. I brought home the Prince Delirious 45, played it. My mom said, "He sounds like Little Richard." And I said, "Who's Little Richard?" And she said, "Get in the car."
Yeah.
And she went and she bought me a Little Richard's Greatest Hits double album, gatefold. And she's the one who really connected the dots for me of like, oh, you like this music, you like this music, you like this artist, you like this artist. And so she really showed me the love of rhythm and blues and Motown Stax, high energy R&B dance music. And I used to make tapes for my mother to paint with. These are my mother's paintings. And she loved to paint to really high energy Isley Brothers, Wilson Pickett, Otis Redding. And so I would make her tapes and just like the bangers. So it was just like one hit after the other. And I was really into alternative. I was really into new wave. I loved hip hop, industrial music. I didn't really understand or get into house in the 80s. And then, of course, grunge came. And I'm from the Pacific Northwest. And so grunge and punk and going to shows was a huge part of my life. And when that is a part of your life, you are subject to the tyranny of cool. And the tyranny of cool is all like white dudes standing around like this at a show going,
yeah.
and like not really outwardly looking like they're having any fun.
No, yeah.
And so then grunge became mainstream, and that was my senior year in high school. And that was when like all of a sudden the cheerleaders are wearing Doc Martens, and you know, the people who like call you names are suddenly wearing band t-shirts that you've loved for years.
Oh,
and
wow.
like
Alternate universe. Like, yeah.
Wow. And it's like, what is going on? And so sort of as a reaction to that, me and my friend Denny started listening to disco. And it started with the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. And then you get to a song like Disco Inferno and you listen to the Tramps. And you're like, this is R&B. This is good. It's like, I mean, that's funk and great and burn, baby, burn.
Yeah.
It's so much fun. And then you just realize like, oh, there's actually really something here. And then when you start digging into the R&B of it all, and you hear bands like Hot Chocolate and Fatback Band, that is when you just realize, oh, wow, this stuff there's really something here.
There's music in this music.
There's music in this music, exactly. Very well said. And that is when I really started to appreciate it. And then, you know, there is something fun about, you know, the abject cheesiness of it all, the Bee Gees and the ABBA-ness of it all. But then you get into Bill Withers and Creative Source and, you know, Donna Summer's early stuff, the Pointer Sisters early stuff. And you dig into that and you're just like, this is just straight up great music.
Yeah.
And then moving to New York was really what kicked it into overdrive for me, because New York is a disco town. And I mean, this is really where it all happened. And so it never really went away. And you hear songs coming out of the cars. Love is the Message, MFSB. I still hear it coming out of cars. And whenever I do, I usually go to the window and like, hey, woo. And so you get into loving disco. And then, of course, I was in a band that was really digging into that sound. So that is really when I started digging into disco. And I have a partner, Seth, who loves disco and was raised on disco, has older sisters who introduced him to the sound and to record collecting. And so the two of us really live in a disco household.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's beautiful, Anna. I'm curious about the intersectionality in terms of disco and where it sits and where it appears in other music. Hip hop, for instance, I think you've touched on break beats and all that kind of stuff. Talk to us a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, disco in Europe never really went away. When you look at footage of Lee Bowery in the 90s, late 80s and early 90s, dancing in the clubs, he's mostly dancing to disco. Taboo was a big disco party. And those sounds were carried on by artists in the 80s. Heaven 17 is very funky and very soulful. And Martin Ware is 100% responsible for Tina Turner's resurgence. And he produced Terence Trent D'Arby, one of the best soul albums.
Really? Oh my goodness me! Terence Trent D'Arby. What was the album called? Remind me, Anna. That because
was it The World According to? I'm gonna look it up.
Is that the If You Let Me Stay?
Yes.
Oh, what an album!
Introducing the Hardline, according to Terence Trent D'Arby.
Yeah.
Is the name.
And
of
that
the
was
album.
Martin Ware.
That's Martin Ware.
Is it really?
And you listen to Gang of Four. Funky.
Yeah.
Funky. Shriek Back. Quando Quango, lots of those Factory Records folks. At New Order, Blue Monday, directly inspired by Donna Summer and Giorgio Moroder. Our Love Will Live Forever. Listen to that song and then listen to Blue Monday.
Oh my gosh. Can I check in with you next week, Hannah? Can we
yeah, of course.
Can we have a regular slot?
Yeah, of course.
I've got so much homework to do. This is mind-blowing.
Yeah, and then of course you have breakbeat culture, the breaks in the disco sounds. There were the boys who would hang out and they would only dance during the breaks. That was break dancing. Then you get the b-boys, then you get the samples in hip hop, then you get house music and techno, all related to the sounds and the synths that were first programmed by people like Giorgio Moroder and Cerrone. And then, of course, house is basically disco and returned that sound to the underground, where it continues to bubble up and have a presence on the charts to this day. And certain sounds will bubble up to the surface right away. And you'll have artists like Madonna, who has consistently referenced what's cool and now in her music.
Indeed.
And then you get people like Charlie XCX looking back and doing dubstep remixes and bringing sounds like that, really, really hard sounds from the dance floor of the early 2000s. The original scene where Scissor Sisters got their start was the Electroclash scene. And the Electroclash scene were the kids who loved house, techno, goth, and hip hop. And if you go back and you listen to Electroclash, you're going to hear very, very hard disco music. And we always used to laugh and say that the best Electroclash song is The Chase by Giorgio Moroder from the Midnight Express soundtrack.
Yeah.
But there's so much crossover there, and it didn't ever really die. If you listen to Madonna or Michael Jackson, they kept that spirit very much intact in their work. Yeah.
So which artists, and I just to expand my own education, and I'm learning so much today, for which I'm very grateful. But I feel I need to start at the bottom up. You've mentioned the producers Gamble.
Gamble and Huff, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to get onto that.
Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff, yeah.
Yeah, love it. So let's start with, can you name a couple of, this is not a test, but could you name a couple of other producers and a couple of other artists for people to start their disco education? You know, so we have some very, very keen listeners, very keen, and they're very good with their homework as well. So if you tell them to listen, they will listen. Where should they start?
Well, you can start with the godfather of all disco, the Walrus of Love, Barry White. Barry White and Love Unlimited Orchestra, which was his orchestra, and he's the daddy. He's it. I love his music, and the song "It's Ecstasy When You Lay Next to Me" is probably the most. To me, I'm just thinking about it and I get goosebumps. And it's a song I never get tired of. And it's everything that disco is, which is, it is cool, hot, sexy, funky, orchestral, lifting and bottoming out funk at the same time. So it's Barry White. Of course, Quincy Jones. Can't go wrong with Quincy Jones.
No, never.
And his solo albums, I highly recommend people check out as well. Ashford and Simpson is another pair of artists who were songwriters and artists in their own right, who people should definitely check out their discography and other songs that they wrote.
Is that now? When you say Ashford and Simpson, I think Solid as a Rock.
That's
Am I
correct.
Right? Oh, what a tune!
Yes.
What a tune.
And as far as musical love stories go, it really doesn't get better than Nick and Valerie. We love them. And of course, Donna Summer and her amazing production partners of Giorgio Moroder and British man Pete Bellotte, who does not get a lot of lip service, but he was always there in all of those.
Yeah. Awesome.
All of those. Cerrone is another big one. Cerrone is incredible. Cerrone is French and is responsible for Love in C Minor, which is the most wonderful disco opus of all time. And Supernature, which is really one of my all-time favorite disco songs as well.
Yeah.
You cannot go wrong with the Fatback Band. Mm-hmm. The Fatback Band and War are two of the most reliably fantastic disco funk bands that are out there. Absolutely love War. Absolutely love Fatback Band. And Fatback Band have something like 22 albums or something like that. So there's a lot in there. There's a lot in there.
A fat catalogue. There's, you know what? There is so much here. I can't wait to get stuck into this. Love in C Minor, though. What a title. My mind immediately went to Mass in D Minor.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Kind of like, you know, sort of like iconic classical works where D minor is a key. Is often
the death key.
Yeah, indeed.
And I'm not even kidding. I'm going to go to bat on this. C minor is the love key. I will. Yeah.
C minor is the love key.
C minor is the love key because that is also I Feel Love. I Feel Love is also in.
Oh my gosh, Donna Summer, right? Mm-hmm. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is blowing my mind today, Anna. This is unbelievable stuff.
And don't forget that the French call orgasm to la petite mort, which is, the little death. So, there's something in there. There's something in the C minor, D minor,
definitely
love,
something in the
sex, death nexus.
This is going to really unexpected places, but I absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. Anna, it's been such a pleasure. Ana Matronic, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Start Here, which is brought to you by the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music. If you liked today's episode, why not go back and check out the other 2 series of Start Here? And if you like disco, you might enjoy our episodes on UK Garage and House. Follow ABRSM on TikTok and Instagram and tell us what genre you want to be unpacked next.